Hello, everyone, and welcome. I hope you're all safe and healthy. We have a lot of content we want to cram into 30 minutes, so let's just get into it. Now, tighten up those sweatpants and those gym shorts and strap in for an exciting session. I'm familiar with a lot of the folks who are joining today, but for those new people, I'm Isaac Brown, Associate Partner here at Landmark Ventures, and we are here today to discuss sustainability within industrial operations. For years, sustainability has really just been a tab on the corporate website, but with no material strategy behind it. But increasingly, sustainability is evolving as a cost avoidance strategy. And a lot of emerging research proves that customers are more likely to buy from sustainable brands. Also, isn't it the right thing to do? Today, we want to talk about business model innovation, risk, and ROI in this emerging space. What's the best way to approach the space to drive growth and efficiency? So let's find out. We'll begin with roughly 20 minutes of a guided panel discussion, followed by audience Q&A. I encourage all the audience members to submit questions via the Q&A chat box throughout, and we'll try and cover those at the end. And I want to start by introducing our panelists. We've got Hicham, Chairman and CEO at Hitachi Americas, and we've got Guneet, Chief Revenue Officer for Relayr. Guys, maybe you could just briefly introduce yourselves, like 30 seconds each. Hicham, you want to go first?
Sure, Isaac. Thanks for setting this up. Glad to be here. And so my name is Hicham Abdessamad. I serve as Chairman and CEO of Hitachi America. So Hitachi is a portfolio of a number of organizations that serve a number of industry sectors like mobility, digital, energy, IT, industrial. We have a large presence in the US, 30,000 employees, about 11 billion in revenue, 88 companies. So glad to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Hicham. Guneet, you want to go ahead?
Absolutely, and Hicham, welcome. Really looking forward to chatting with you here. Relayr, as some of you know, I see some familiar names. We're a fully owned subsidiary of Munich Re, the largest reinsurance company, but we focus on industrial mid-market customers and creating an as-a-service business model and revenue model. And sustainability has really been top of mind for a lot of people, so I'm really excited about the topic. And I spent quite a few years, a few decades before that, in enterprise software and hardware. Oracle and Cisco's of the world, where they transitioned to this. Hicham, believe it or not, 9 years ago, I actually acquired a company which is focused on IoT and energy management at Cisco. That was the first foray Cisco had into as a service subscription. Today, 60% of the revenue comes from subscriptions. So it's interesting. So 6 years ago, took the leap into the industrial world and saw, hey, can we transform the industrial world into this? And Isaac, back to you, and look forward to today.
Awesome. Thanks. So I just want to jump into it with a big picture question. Obviously, everybody's been talking about sustainability for years, but as far as I'm concerned, enterprise will finally do sustainability because they can make more money or spend less money. So how do digital sustainability technologies yield revenue increases and cost savings? Hicham, you want to jump on that one?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. So, as you can see, there's a big focus, as you mentioned, around sustainability and ESG and renewable energy, decarbonization, and doing the right thing for the environment. And Hitachi's had that, we call it social innovation, and we've had a big environmental focus for quite some time, but I think it's been sort of in the spotlight now over the last couple of years, certainly last year. As you can see in the market, you hear a lot about every company's got some sort of target, right? Their baseline is this, and they want to be carbon neutral by 2030 or 2050 across their supply chain. And what you don't hear a lot about is how you're going to get there. You don't hear a lot about, what kind of innovation, what are some of the things you need to do internally as an organization to achieve those goals. So I think goals are great, but how you get there is key. So we think that, and in Hitachi, and I know Relayr feels the same way, is that innovation is the key to energy sustainability. And Hitachi, we positioned ourselves as an environmental innovator. So I think that technology is going to play a big role. So things like AI, machine learning, robotics, advanced automation, anything that's going to optimize an asset to consume less energy, to drive more revenue, to be highly more efficient, are things that usually technology is good for. So we feel that there is a logical sort of intersection between what we see in the innovation curve as far as these new technologies and their role in driving a sustainable future. So if you're a factory or an organization or a company, digital transformation initially was talked about as a good thing to drive automation and drive efficiency and reduce costs and improve revenue streams and create new business models. But I think you have to start thinking about what is the role of digital transformation in towards your renewable sort of goals and targets, and how do you sort of blend those two and have a digital transformation agenda that's also energy efficient or drives your overall sustainability agenda.
Yeah, I completely agree, Isaac. And to add to that, Isaac, I just wanted to say love what Hicham said. We have the Euro Cup going on. We're a German company, so of course we follow a lot of football. I'll take a sporting analogy. You need the top players to win, which is your revenue as a company and your innovation. And Hicham, you're absolutely right. The technology is there, and I equate that to a stadium, your state-of-the-art stadiums. But from a long-term resiliency perspective, you need a good culture. For a sports team to win. And I equate sustainability to that element of culture. And you're absolutely right. How do you use technology to build more resilient revenues, which is sustainable, which is more an as a service, kind of innovation, which, you and I know we've been working on for a while. And then on the back end, how do you build that resiliency in your bottom line? And I think that's where the long-term sustainability comes from. And it's phenomenal to see. In fact, we have such bad news in the last 18 months. But one good thing is that, I was looking up the statistics, 21% of the largest 2,000 companies have put a net zero goal and aggressively pushed a goal. So I'd say that's one silver lining of COVID to kind of use that as a long-term sustainable differentiation. So I love what you said.
Yeah, and Hicham, one of the things I think is interesting is everybody has these goals, but how do you get there, right? I think that's a big piece of it that's not talked about as much. So actually, Guneet, since this is what you spend so much time doing, I want to pitch this one to you. How do emerging industrial business models improve environmental health and safety and translate to resilience?
Really good question. Isaac, I think from a nuts and bolts perspective, we see a couple of things. One, there are so many inefficiencies in the industrial world, right? Be it inefficiencies of how you consume capital and equipment, but also a lot of inefficiencies in the older equipment. And as you know, industrial world is used to keeping things 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. And one of the things we're seeing as a trend is to move to newer equipment, more efficient equipment, connected equipment with AI, with VR, to kind of really drive efficiencies. But it's expensive. And I think that's why we see the whole as a service model where the companies are moving away from buying efficient equipment to buying capacity, and buying capacity which can be used the way pay-per-use, but more importantly, drive that 30, 40, 50% carbon neutrality. And so I think that's one big trend we see, which is a lot of companies want to get efficient, both in the supply chain as well as in the equipment. We don't see so much supply chain. I'm sure, Hicham, you do. I'd love to get your perspective, but we see equipment. And they are completely looking at revamping their equipment, which is why technology and business models are probably one of the key things, to drive that. Hicham, what do you think about supply chain or anything else?
It's interesting because sustainability and resiliency go hand in hand. And I think, as you see in the last 18 months, what we've learned is that we're not very resilient. I think that most supply chains had a shock. A supply shock. I mean, even today with the rise of inflation and supply issues and semiconductor shortages. So there is a lack of resiliency out there. And I think what people used to do is, especially, I think the industrial sort of manufacturing sector is a little bit behind the times. And I believe so. As we think about other industries, when you look at like consumer digital, the Googles, the Netflix, the Apples, even IT, for example, SAP and Salesforce, and they're all gone some sort of as a service model, digital economy, very consumption-based economics. But the industrial world is still kind of machines and trying to figure out how to optimize the machines and worrying about downtime and how is my challenges around supply chain. So they're still dealing with traditional challenges. They all have instrumented and used IoT in some level of degree and been very disappointed. Most IoT projects have failed because they haven't really delivered sort of the promise. And I think people, when they look at IoT, they look at it as, well, let's do predictive maintenance, or but that's not really what IoT is. There's no value in that. Things really don't fail all that much. You have to think about the whole thing very holistically. And then what do? Do you go build a factory from scratch? And most people don't have the resources and the money to do that. And that's why companies like relayr comes in and say, hey, I can help optimize what you have using very new innovative technologies, and not just about sensors, but it's the whole sort of value chain. So resiliency is a challenge, and something that we've been in Hitachi very, very much working on is that we call it value chain resiliency. And you have it in food, you have it in energy, you have it in manufacturing. We all know that it's an interconnected world that's very highly interdependent. The challenge is that the data is not shared across all the suppliers. So most companies don't have visibility. If their supplier runs out, has a supply shortage 2-3 months from now on a single part, they'll stop, it would affect their manufacturing process and their capacity downstream. And we've seen that in the semiconductor shortage, that the world relies on 3 companies in the world that supply semiconductors for just about everybody. And you see that in the car market and other industries. So I think collectively we have to start thinking about visibility towards your value chain and understanding, kind of stress test it, kind of like the financial stress tests were done in 2007, 2008 crisis. You have to sort of stress test your entire value chain and identify areas of softness or risk, and then come up with ways to build a stronger resiliency. So just-in-time manufacturing is wonderful when everything works beautifully, but it doesn't work when your supply chain has a crack. And I think those are some of the things that we need to look for. So how do you fix that? It is about digital. It is about innovation. It's about data access. Data is very siloed. And it's about working as an ecosystem to really understand and make sure we have a solid sort of digital foundation by which you run your business. So it's a big problem to tackle. It's a very wide problem to tackle. So you have to kind of focus on sort of the low-hanging fruits. And the first thing is visibility across your value chain. Sounds simple, very difficult to do. And that's what companies like relayr and Hitachi really are focusing on right now.
Yeah, and I think what you'll find interesting, folks, is we came here to discuss sustainability, and none of us are talking about carbon savings and environmental savings, because I love what you said, Hicham. It's really linked to your core business. It's really linked to resiliency. And, I see a few questions, and I'll break the process, Isaac, because the gentleman who asked the question is Austin, and I live in Austin, so I have to break the process for Austin. But he said, how do you... I have to, Austin, thank you for asking the question. But, how do you demonstrate economic end benefit? I think Hicham just laid it out to you. You cannot have a sustainability strategy without impacting your core business, be it your revenues, be it your bottom line, be it your productivity, for that matter, right, Hicham? And I think we see a lot of companies struggling with how do you, we're part of Hartford Steam Boiler, as an example, right? And, you would think boilers, like, just damn give steam, but the amount of boiler infrastructure we see, which is outdated, is just mind-boggling. We see boilers all the way to World War II, right? And, if you're a food and beverage, or if you're an ice cream plant, you really need to get a new boiler and water heater system, which is actually drive your bottom line, drives more revenues with efficiency and everything we said. And of course, it'll help you with your carbon goal, right? So I think it really has to be hand in hand, which means I'd love to get your perspective on this, Hicham. I hate it when people say, let's do a pilot and let's start with, proving this out, because I think the end game is important. And then you kind of build up towards it. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that the thing that most people are struggling with, and I think I've seen some of the questions here, is that, sustainability costs money. I mean, the bottom line is the ROI for sustainability is terrible. At the onset, if you look at it purely from hey, we need to be more green, right? And we need to have green infrastructure, green processes, and decarbonize as much as possible. You have to tie sustainability to your revenue growth, your profitability, because I think they go hand in hand. And you get that at some sort of scale. So, we're looking at sustainability around EV, for example, right? And when you look at commercial EV, converting your fleet, 20% of your fleet to EV doesn't mean you're going to save a ton of money. It doesn't work that way, right? It's great for the environment, but once you convert 50, 60% and get to some level of scale, not only within your organization, but across the entire network, and I'm talking the ecosystem, then you start to see some benefits of that. So I think it's environmental and digital transformation and sort of driving growth and efficiency of an organization. All those things have to tie in together. But if you look at them individually, you'll probably be disappointed. And I think that's a challenge a lot of companies have. And you don't have to be sustainable tomorrow. I think it's a journey, but you need to make sure that while you're driving sustainability goal for the organization, because it's the right thing to do for the environment, we all believe that's absolutely the must thing to do for all of us, because collectively we have to all play a role. Otherwise, it just won't work. You also have to think about how do you do this profitably in the long run? And I think we do believe that if you focus on it strategically, it will benefit your business. First of all, You're going to get more customers who want to do business with you just by default because you're a sustainable organization. You'll get more investments because you're a sustainable innovator per se. So there's a lot of other sort of byproduct or tangent benefits that you get out of that. So sustainability, digital transformation, growth, all those things have to be connected. You can't have a sustainable strategy by itself and other things going on. And they're not really, they have to be linked for them to all work together and for you to get the benefits.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I want to come back to one thing you just said there. By the way, my favorite panel discussions are the ones where I don't have to do any talking. So thank you guys. This is great. But yeah, there's one specific thing I did want to cover in this discussion, which you just mentioned, Hicham, which is this idea that being able to demonstrate sustainability drives growth through customer acquisition, right? And I think it's really well established right now for consumer brands. You know, if a food company or a CPG company can show a very sustainable supply chain, it'll increase customer retention. How does that play out for industrials? You know, how does being able to demonstrate sustainability deliver brand enhancement and customer stickiness for industrial and B2B companies? Who wants to jump on that one?
Who's jumping, Guneet?
I can go first, and I'd love to get Hicham's perspective right after. I mean, that was interesting. I was talking to the head of Europe for Unilever, and he did say exactly what he said. He said, not only people want to buy from sustainable brands, they're okay paying a premium, you know, in the next gen on sustainable brands, which is interesting, right? But I think in the industrial world, it's a little different. And you're right. I think, first of all, I'm a big fan of the circular economy concept, right, which leads to sustainability. The biggest questions a lot of companies have is, hey, I sell an expensive equipment and I never talk to my customers for 10 years after that. And I, by the way, try and want to sell them the next expensive equipment 10 years from now. So I think the first thing is customer relationship and intimacy over a period of time. That's what digital and as a service revenue models help you build. And once you do that, you actually control both the materials, the supply chain, as well as how much sustainability you can have. So I think not is it just better for the environment, but it helps you improve your revenue resiliency and your bottom line. And because you have the customer intimacy, Isaac, that you were asking, you actually build up on that to actually drive towards both sustainability and a circular economy. Because amount of material which goes waste in old machines is just also mind-boggling. And with as a service revenue models, you can actually optimize that. You can reuse a lot of that material, which leads to sustainability. So I don't think there's a direct connection today, to answer it bluntly, and I'd love to get Hicham's perspective. But with that customer intimacy, you can actually build a very long-term sustainable model. I don't know, Hicham, what you think about it.
Well, no, I totally agree. I totally agree with you. I'm just scanning here the chat here, just for purposes of time. There's a couple of questions that I'd like to address. One is actually, it's a good one. It says, sustainability. Let's see. I understand if I understood earlier from your earlier statement, why do you think application of IoT for optimization of maintenance programs is not a good use of IoT? So let me just clarify that. It's well, I didn't say it wasn't a good use for IoT, but if you're doing IoT just to predict maintenance or optimize an asset by itself, the ROI is not going to be there. But if you think about it holistically in terms of the entire value chain. So for example, when you look at equipment, you look at it in terms of how do I optimize and predict failures and make sure that things run continuously. But I also need to make sure that I can take that data and move it to make sure that I'm not stocking and storing all the inventory that I want you to store from a spare parts perspective. So when you start to unlock pieces of value chain across your factory, so when you do IoT, do it holistically across, and you start with equipment maintenance and failure, but you got to tie it back to your inventory and your spare parts and your logistics and all the other things that run your factory. So if you digitize, then you start to unlock the value across the value chain. So that's what we're saying. So if you go out with a use case that says a business case for predictive maintenance by itself, and that's where you stop, you'll have an incomplete ROI. But if you extend it out to, now that you understand, when things fail and how they fail, then you could say, all right, I don't need to store spare parts everywhere in every factory I have just in case, because that's a very expensive proposition. Or you can use that data to intelligently figure out how to manage your supply better and your inventory, your spare parts better, and so forth. There's another question, if you don't mind, just talking about, there's something about AI. And okay, so there's a question that was interesting. We talk about using AI to tackle the sustainability challenge, but we never talk about how much energy is needed to run AI, which worsens the problem rather than solving it. We need to think about that as well. So it's an interesting question. One thing is that a lot of people confuse energy and electricity use, and they're two different things. So electric vehicles use a lot of electricity, right? So it's about the energy source. So we're talking about AI. Yeah, AI runs on machines. You can argue those computers use a lot of energy, but it's about the source of energy. Is it renewable? Is it from solar, wind, stranded energy? So it's all about that. So I think what we're combating here is, yeah, of course, energy use has to be moderate, and it doesn't have to be excessive and wasteful, but the source of your energy has to come from renewable sources. So wind, we've seen a lot of stranded energy sources like wind and solar, and there's others as well. So we're trying to make sure we have a balanced energy source, energy production source that can help run the environment. So yeah, so hopefully that answered your question.
That's a really good point. And two things to add that, Hicham. One, actually the AI, especially with distributed models all the way to the edge, is actually very energy efficient or electricity efficient too, right? So I think that's a good point. The second thing is, you said this, we are a big fans of what we call vertical value integration, but the sum of the value has to be more than the value consumed. So of course, like you said, if AI solves a small problem like predictive maintenance, of course AI could be more energy efficient. But if you solve the whole problem of removing 10% inefficiencies in supply chain or in how the equipment is used, I mean, going back to my boilers example, the amount of energy we waste to create steam and water today, if we can even increase that by 10%, I think it should cover, and nobody's done that analysis, but it should cover the AI cost, right, especially with the AI being so low. Right?
There's one thing you've touched on, Guneet, that I'd like to kind of stress a little bit more on this whole as a service economy, which is very circular in nature, and that where the industrial sector hasn't really embraced it. Think of Netflix, right? Everybody knows how to use that. It's a consumption model. You pay for content monthly and you get value. Why doesn't those sort of rules apply to the industrial economy? So equipment as a service, energy as a service. I think these are concepts that are solutions that could really potentially help these organizations address these challenges, because you can't really do it alone. So, meaning, as a company, when you have limited resources, CapEx is a problem, you have old equipment, and you want to solve this issue around sustainability, but also just being very efficient, your margins are very slim, you're kind of stuck. So what you want to do is think about, okay, who is out there in my ecosystem? Is there partners, companies I can work with that can give this to me as a service, in the sense that they can take some of that risk, share some of that reward. And I know relayr and Hitachi, we have solutions that we can come in and give you X as a service, whether it's asset as a service, equipment as a service, EV as, energy as a service. There's a lot we can do inside your manufacturing shop floor, but it does take a little bit of a leap of faith, and it takes a little bit of partnership and trust. But I believe the X as a service economy really can help the industrial sector. And of course, once you do that, you can drive sustainability. And it's something that, I urge anybody in especially the people who are watching this stream to really think about. And then who do you want to partner with? You don't want to partner with people who want to sell you equipment or sell you software. You want to partner with people who have a vested interest in your success and want to come in and put skin in the game and say, let's do this part as a service. What does that mean? Well, we're going to take over your equipment. We're going to manage it, maintain it. We're going to predict failures. We're going to provide parts. You don't have to worry about it. And we're going to give you a predictable sort of cost model that should be less than what you're doing today, but with a high level of efficiency. And then you can kind of reallocate those funds towards increasing your revenue stream, so we can kind of work on the efficiency side. It's just examples of things that, we'd love for folks to think about as solutions to how to tackle this sustainability efficiency challenge that you see in the factory shop floor.
Yeah. I want to, several of the questions that have come in from the Q&A are kind of around this theme of X as a service, right? And how to do it, why it's hard. There's one question here in the Q&A box that just, I think, perfectly kind of summarizes it. So I want to pitch this to you guys. I'm a believer, right? I've been working in the space for a while. I get it, but I think a lot of industrial companies struggle with it, right? So what are the main reasons that industrial companies and OEMs struggle to move from these traditional transactional and CapEx models into X as a service?
think it's very fundamental, Isaac, but I think it's what we call swallowing the fish. They're used to revenue coming in a certain way, report to the Wall Street, all executive payment and incentives are aligned to that. And suddenly you need a dip in revenue for as a service revenues to actually get more sustainable revenue in the future. And I think it's as fundamental as that, and understanding how do you just make that transition and transition for public companies to the Wall Street, transition to private companies and the cash flow. Of course, there are ways to get around it. There's, capital is, if not free, really cheap now. So a lot of companies are thinking about how to do this. But to me, and I'd love to get Hicham's perspective, there's a lot of other reasons, but the fundamental reason is, how do you go from showing a big $1 million CapEx sale, incentivizing sales, incentivizing everybody, to suddenly $40K a month, which is really good in the long run, but it is a immediate dip. And Hicham, what do you think?
No, I totally agree. And I think it's, what's stopping folks from going to X as a service? It's fear, change, it's new, fear of failure, maybe not having the right partners, maybe just not having a good strategy that's more holistic, not finding a project that's more of a low-hanging fruit where you can apply some of these. So my advice is that you have to just jump in. I'm not saying jump your entire enterprise and change it overnight, but you have some very inefficient systems, processes, businesses, whatever you want to call it, within that you can easily transform with the right partners, right? So again, remember, I would urge you always to don't look for people who are trying to sell you software or products, or because that's what the technology industry does. It's classic, right? They always have a product. Boy, do I have a product for you that does exactly that. And in reality, this is not a product thing. It's really an ecosystem. It's a solution. It's an outcome driven. It's a value driven proposition. But it does take what we call in Hitachi level of co-creation and partnership to be able to do that. So what we're saying is don't go after the whole elephant. Just start small. Show some early wins, some quick results, and then you naturally going to say, all right, let's expand this out. And I think what people have had, unfortunately, is they've played with IoT for a little while. They've had failures. They've played with digital transformation. They failed. They've hired consultants, and it just never. So that's why this entire industry has never gone over the hump, partly because it's really our responsibility as solution providers to make this a little bit easier for the industry to consume. And to think big picture instead of sort of short-term goals of selling products or solutions. So that's
that really resonates with me. And as you know, we've taken the leap of transitioning almost all of our contracts into gain share, revenue share, because I think we think at the end that'll be better, more resilient. But of course, it's very aligned with the ecosystem. And I think it's a big leap, but hopefully we're successful. But it's a big leap to kind of take it to the gain share model. And I love your thought about ecosystems, Hicham. I think that's the only way to succeed in this model, right? And also the micro goals concept. So again, to clarify, I think somebody asked in the chat, pilots are bad, but micro goals are good, right? Because you actually are building towards a bigger goal with proving it out, like you said, piecemeal by piecemeal, or eating the elephant one piece at a time. So yeah, that's I definitely resonate. Actually, let me throw an idea at you, and would love to get your perspective. I think a lot of this has been talked about it. So would decarbonization as a service with gain share work in your mind, where somebody can come and just do that entire decarbonization effort as a service?
Well, think about it. It makes a lot of sense. So let's just say you own a building or a factory, right? And you have very bad, you're an offender, you're a big carbon emitter. What do? You don't have the money to go retrofit and build, so bring on new equipment that's energy efficient. Your processes, you can't really change them. You need to produce because you got orders. I mean, your business has to run. So what you have to do is you have to partner with someone who says, you know what? I'm going to invest in you, and we're going to help you get to it. We're going to invest in putting your infrastructure in, whether it's just going after just how you cool your building, how you manage waste in your building. You can start there, and you do it as a service. So yeah, the vendor or the partner in this case will provide that infrastructure ahead of time, or those assets. You be able to measure and get a baseline, and then you pay by sort of performance in terms of how you're advanced. So honestly, I don't see a way out. And so the governments, as you know, are putting so much money now and propose to kind of help the world decarbonize. They're focusing on EV and renewable energy. And not a lot of people are talking about, okay, factories. and how do you help them? But I think there's room. So I think as a decarb as a service, something that we actually have had some strong conversations with, and you do that with partners, right? It's not one company doing it for you. It's 3 or 4 coming together and providing a solution that says, I'm going to give you a decarbonization solution as a service for your campus or your factory, your building. I think that's where the industry should be going.
I agree.
Because it's challenging to go, if you want to go build a building from scratch or build a factory from scratch, that's right. You're going to build a green and it's all good. The challenge is how do you retrofit the existing, and that's very expensive. So
I totally agree. And I think the gain share model makes so much sense there. Just to add a couple of things, and I know, Isaac, we can run over for a few minutes.
Sure.
There's a few tactical questions from Craig and a few others around the value chain being transformed and FASB rules and accounting. Just getting tactical for a minute, nuts and bolts. It is absolutely possible to do it. We at relayr and Munich Re have a whole concept of shell companies and sort of setting up special purpose vehicles where we can actually procure your equipment as a CapEx, created as an OpEx with accounting leases off balance sheet. So innovation is not just happening in IoT and digital and AI. There's a lot of innovating happening in the financing piece. And again, like Hicham said, look at partners. We're one of them, but there are other partners who can do that. Also, a lot of innovation on the insurance side. The way we underwrite is completely going through a transformation to underwrite decarbonization risks, for example, or doing the risk revenue share model. So I just wanted to add that a little bit more nuts and bolts view.
No, great point. And I think together as an industry, we have to build packages for people and customers to consume, right? So t-shirt size solutions. And that's what we need to do. So it takes a lot of work, but there are special purpose vehicles. There's things you can do here to drive that agenda forward. Yeah, that's it. It looks like Isaac left. Maybe we can pick up. Oh, here he is.
Sorry, I got a puppy who's really good at figuring out when I'm doing something important. I think we're good. If you guys want to jump on a few more of these questions here, we can run over a few minutes. I know that some of the audience will have to depart, but are there any others that you guys? By the way, thanks to the audience for some great questions. Very engaging. But any other things you guys want to jump on that you see in here?
Just looking here. Guneet, do you see anything that?
This is a good one. Can it be a voluntary effort, or does it have to come out as a regulation? What do you think of that, Hicham?
Well, it should be a voluntary effort because it's the right thing to do. But regulation sort of forces the issue in the sense that it does penalize you if you don't comply, but it gives you a lot of good credits if you do. I think the government has a role in here because we're talking trillions of dollars in investments in what we call social infrastructure, and investments don't come without regulation, right? So I think it should be voluntary. So the private sector is expected to kind of do this on their own, but the smaller companies, especially smaller companies in the private sector, they're gonna need help, right? And I think that's why I welcome the role of the government to help out in some of these industries. It's a driver. So it's really a team effort. It's public, private, and regulation is a part of it, because at the end of the day, if you put so much time and energy and investment to decarbonize and do the right thing, but then your neighbor company is doing none of that, of course their business will suffer because people are not going to do business with them. But then there's going to be some sort of price to pay for not complying because you're just not contributing, not doing your part. That's kind of where regulation will kind of help with some, just to kind of even the playing field and make it a little bit fair for all participants.
Yeah, I agree. And going back to my sports analogy, I think everybody has to play a role, right? The private sector can go get fans, make some money. It has to be voluntary with an economic benefit, of course, but it has to be voluntary. But, the roads have to be ready. The parking lots have to be ready. Everything else has to be ready around the stadium to kind of play their role. And of course, take the advantage out of it, because the government will also benefit from the infrastructure, the reduction. I mean, we're in Texas, brownouts and blackouts happen like nobody's business, but they'll get benefit of the infrastructure being easier, everything being easier on the energy infrastructure as an example. So I agree. I think everybody has to play a role, but I think the private sector will have to lead this voluntarily with economic benefit.
I think the economic benefit is a difficult part that the private sector has a hard time wrapping their arms around. And I think some big companies do it for optics, and be honest. So they'll be like, okay, it's what we need to do because it's the right thing, our shareholders. And I think, but I feel there is going to be an economic benefit at the end if you do this at scale and if everybody is on the same page. And that's why this whole, if everyone's on the same page, then you get to that sort of economic benefit that also is good for the environment. So I believe that you can do both. They're just not aligned 100% from day one, but at a certain time they will be.
Yeah. One last question for me here, and now I can wrap up if you want. Our subscription model, this is a very good question, because it says our subscription model is only interesting for SMEs, or is a certain size required? It's a really interesting question, because when Hicham and I talked, we talked a lot about this. As relayr, we only work with companies which are mid-market. We only work with companies which are less than 2 billion. Of course, Hicham works with all Fortune 2002. So it's not for a particular size. It's for anybody and everybody. I think anybody and everybody can make an impact. Would you agree, Hicham?
No, I agree. I think as a service subscription is for everybody. Now, the smaller companies are more incented to do it because they sort of like, it makes sense. It makes business sense. So I think the sort of the adoption is easier with the smaller companies, but the large organizations are looking for the same thing. Like I said, we consumed, we are as a service economy already as consumers, right?
Yeah.
Food, transportation, what we watch, all the subscriptions, I'm sure you have a million. So that model has been proven true. And then you take that upstream to sort of the IT industry software. I mean, it's all SaaS now. Nobody's buying licenses, right? It's all in the cloud. Yeah. So that's been evolving over the last 3 or 4 years when the big hyperscaler and everybody moved, Microsoft moved their business to cloud. They were primarily a licensed business. Oracle did the same way. And then there's some new unicorns that weren't unicorns like Workday and ServiceNow and companies like that. So I think the industrial sort of sector is just behind, but it's not behind in a bad way. It's just that it take the same kind of business model and figure out how will it work in the industrial world. And I think, to me, as a service is not the entire answer, but it's definitely part of the answer. And it doesn't matter what size. I think it goes across the board in any industry.
And it doesn't matter if you're an OEM or a distributor or service provider either, which is very interesting because you can vertically value integrate both ways.
That's right.
We see a lot of service providers move fasting and vertically integrating backwards, eating OEM's lunch, and then the OEMs moving forward. So I think both are possible. It is a harder problem to solve because there's millions and millions in supply chain.
The numbers are bigger, right?
Yes,
the economics are much bigger. The legacy is bigger in terms of legacy systems, but it's something that we need to do. And we've been talking about for years, and we have to get there. And I think some sort of sustainability agenda is kind of forcing the issue because now we have to think about clever ways to be sustainable, continue going, try to optimize, grow your revenue, grow your margins. How do you do all that? Well, you have to think outside the box. And as a service is one of the answers. Not all, but definitely one that needs to be explored.
I agree.
I think that's a good point to wrap, guys. That was great. Really appreciate your time and your insights. Really appreciate the attendees who joined, all spending a little extra time with us and submitting some great questions. We'll be sending out a thank you email to everyone who joined today. It'll share a recording of the session. If anyone's interested in connecting with me or any of the other panelists, just shoot me a note and we'll make it happen. But I want to thank everybody. I hope everyone is safe and healthy, and I hope you have a wonderful, sustainable rest of your day.
Thank you, Isaac.
Thanks, guys.
Guneet.
Thanks, Isaac.
Bye-bye.
Bye.